In this video, you will learn the most common modes to run your calculator in. To get to the mode screen, first turn on your calculator and select the Mode button. In this screen, you will learn how to set up the following modes: normal, scientific, floating decimal, fixed decimal, radian, degree, function, parametric, polar, connected, dot, sequential, simultaneous, real, and full screen. The normal mode is the most common way to express numbers. Make sure your calculator is in the normal mode. If the normal mode is not highlighted, use the left arrow key and move it to the normal mode and then select Enter. To get back to the main screen, select the second function key and then Quit. First, you will see the difference between the normal and scientific mode. First, we will enter in a simple calculation, such as 36 times 54. Hit the Enter key, which is equivalent to the equal sign, and you can see that the answer is displayed as 1,944. If we go to the Mode key again, and we want to display this answer in scientific notation, we will move the cursor to the right, so it's highlighting the psi, and then select Enter. To exit this screen, hit the second function key and Quit. Now we will do the same calculation again. 36 times 54. Hit Enter, and now your answer is displayed in scientific notation. This means 1.944 times 10 to the third power. The capital E represents times 10, and the 3 represents to the third power. To clear the screen, we will go ahead and click Clear. Unless you want your answer displayed in scientific notation, then keep the calculator in normal mode. So let's go back to the normal mode. Now you will see the difference between the floating decimal mode and fixed decimal mode. So let's hit our Mode key, and here it says Float for the floating decimal mode, and these are the fixed decimal modes, and you can select any one of them. So let's first keep it on the floating decimal mode, and it already is. So let's get out of this screen, and let's enter in the calculation 2 times pi. Select 2 times, and then remember the second function key controls the blue keys, and this is where the pi is, right here. You can see, you hit that key, and you can see on the screen we have 2 times pi, and then we'll hit the Enter key to get our result. So here you can see that this is just an approximate answer that is accurate to 10 digits. Now let's compute 200 times pi, and this will actually illustrate how the floating point decimal mode actually works. So let's enter in 200, and then times pi. Now we don't need to use the multiplication symbol. We can just simply go ahead and put second function and then pi in. So that's 200 pi. It just saves you a keystroke, and select enter. Notice that this is an approximation and it's accurate to 10 digits, just as the previous answer was accurate to 10 digits. Okay? Now, if you notice, the decimal has floated to a location dependent upon the magnitude of the number. So initially, this value is in ones. This number here is in the hundreds. So it floated from this point 2 more decimal places to the right. So this is actually what the floating point decimal mode does for you. And it will always display the answer with 10 digits. For many computations, it is common to round your answers off to 2 or 3 decimal places. This can be set in the calculator by going back to the floating point decimal mode and then selecting one of the values that you would like to round your answer off to. So let's select the mode key. Now we're going to go ahead and move the cursor to this specific line. You can see that it's flashing right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the down arrow key and then move to the right to select a fixed decimal. Now we said we want to go ahead and use, let's say, 3 decimal places. Our answer is going to be written to 3 decimal places. And then we hit enter here to submit that. And then we're going to go ahead and get out of this by hitting second function and then quitting. On the screen, I already have computed 2 times pi in the floating point decimal mode. So we can compare our result in the floating point decimal mode to the fixed decimal mode. Now let's do the same calculation. That is 2 times pi. And you can see now that our answer is displayed to only 3 decimal places. And you can change this all the way up from 0 decimal places to 9 decimal places. So now let's go back to the mode screen. And take a look one more time. If we did not want our answer to any decimal places, we would go ahead and put it on 0. So let's take a look what that would do. So again, let's move our cursor down to the second line and then move it to the right. Now you can see it flashing on the 0, and that's what we want. So we will have to submit that by hitting enter. And let's get out of this mode. And let's do the same calculation again. So we have 2 times pi. And that answer is just 6, because what it does is it rounds your answer to the nearest integer. There are no decimal places here. So let's go ahead and clear a screen. If you are working with angles, you can choose radian or degree mode. This mode is only relevant if you are working with trigonometric functions such as sine, cosine, tangent, or the reciprocals of those functions. For example, let's say we want to compute the sine of 90 degrees. Since we are working in degrees, we need to be in degree mode. So we need to go to mode. You can see down here we have a radian and a degree mode. So let's put it in degree mode. Select enter. And then just to verify, we want to make sure we're in floating point mode and then in normal mode. And we are. So let's get out of this, second function, and then quit. Let's compute the sine of 90 degrees. Select enter for our result, and it shows that the sine of 90 degrees is 1. Now 90 degrees is equivalent to pi divided by 2 radians. So let's go back to the radian mode. So we'll go Mode, and let's select radian mode. So move the cursor to the left, which it already is flashing there, and then we will hit Enter to select it, and then we will get out of this screen. And let's compute now the sine of pi divided by 2 radians, and we should get the same answer. And indeed we do. Now let's just show that if we wanted to compute the sine of 90 degrees and we are in the wrong mode, we're in radian mode, you're going to get a wrong answer. So let's check that out. So the sine of 90 degrees will not give us 1. It will actually be showing us the answer of the sine of 90 radians, which is equal to this value right here. So it's key to be in the correct mode when you're working with trigonometric functions. If you're working with degrees, then be in degree mode. If you're working with radians, then make sure you're in radian mode. So let's get out of this screen and clear our screen by hitting the clear button. Now let's go back into the mode button, and we're going to be talking about the function mode, the parametric mode, and the polar mode. The function mode is the most common mode you will be using because when graphing functions, it uses the standard notation that y is a function of x. Parametric mode will be used when you want to graph x and y, each as a function of t. Polar mode is used in trigonometry and will only be used when you want to graph r as a function of the angle theta. When graphing functions, they can be shown in connected or dot mode. You can see here there's the connected and the dot mode. Connected mode draws a line connecting each point the calculator has plotted. Dot mode only shows the individual points plotted. So let's take a look at an example of this. First we'll graph a function in connected mode. And you can see that it already is highlighted as connected. So let's get out of this screen, and then we'll graph a function. Now later we'll learn how to graph a function in greater detail, but first we'll just start out by selecting the y equals button, and we'll enter in a simple function. This is the variable key, and you can see that the first variable is x, so we will press this key, and we're going to graph x squared. So we'll hit the squared button, and then graph the function. So this is what the function looks like in connected mode. Remember that connected mode draws a line connecting each point the calculator has plotted. So there may be a whole bunch of individual points that the calculator has automatically plotted, and it connects a line through all of those points. Now let's see what it looks like in dot mode. So let's go ahead back into the mode, and we will go to the dot mode. So we need to move the cursor down, move it to the right, and remember, select Enter, and let's get out of this screen. So let's hit the y equal button, and we're graphing the same function as you can see, and then we will go ahead and hit the graph button. Now you can see individual dots. So this is dot mode, And remember that this mode only shows the individual points that the calculator has actually plotted. It doesn't connect them together as it did in the connected mode. And you can see on the right here of what the connected mode looked like. So let's hit clear to clear the screen. Let's take a look at what the sequential and simultaneous mode does. First, what we're going to do is get into connected mode. We will move the cursor down and then select Enter. The sequential mode is already highlighted. Now in sequential mode, the functions are graphed in order, starting with the first function, the second function, the third function, and so on. So let's see what happens here in sequential mode when we graph. So let's get out of this mode. If we go back to our y equals, we still have the function y equal x squared there. So let's move the cursor down to the next function. Let's enter a straight line such as y equal x plus 2. Now take a close look when we graph. The first thing that you'll see is x squared being plotted, and then you'll see x plus 2 plotted. So let's graph this. So there's x squared, and there's x plus 2. So it plotted the first function, and then it plotted the second function. So it did it in order. Let's go back to the Mode button and see what happens in simultaneous mode. Select Enter, and then we will quit, and then select y equal, and you can see both the functions are in there. And if we hit Graph, what will happen is both of the functions will show up at once, all at the same time. As you can see in the simultaneous mode, both of the functions are being plotted at the same time, or simultaneously. Most of the time you will be graphing in sequential mode. So before we go on, let's go ahead and put the calculator back into sequential mode. So let's move the cursor down to sequential and then select Enter. And then we will quit out of this screen. Let's go back to the Mode button. Let's discuss the last two modes. The real mode is used for working in the real number system. Most of the time you will be working in the real number system, and you will keep it on the real mode. If you are ever working in the imaginary number system, you can put the cursor to A plus BI, which is the imaginary number system mode. The full mode uses the entire screen. So when you're graphing in full mode or doing calculations in the full mode, you'll get to use the entire screen. Now let's take a minute to go ahead and see what our actual modes should be when we're using our calculator, just for the basics. It should be in normal mode, floating point decimal. Radian or degree mode does not matter unless you're using trigonometric functions. Function mode, connected, sequential, real, and then full. If you first get your calculator and it is not in these particular modes, then you can go ahead and change them. The other modes are specialized, and you should refer to your manual if you want to explore the other modes of your calculator.